Welcome to Marketing Demystified, the podcast that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips to transform your marketing game? You're in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jenn Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. Now, at times, the B2B buying process can be frustrating or, dare I say, infuriating. How are decisions getting made? Who's involved in making them? What's the process? And how can we better harness it? Kerry Cunningham, Research and Thought Leadership at 6 Sense, joins us today with the answers. Welcome to the show, Kerry.
Thanks, Jen. Great to be here.
Really excited to have you on. This is like such an important topic. I think there's a lot of complexity to the B2B buying process. So I'm really interested to hear your take on it and what we could learn from it to maybe do a better job.
Great. Absolutely.
So tell me, why do you think the B2B buying process can be so difficult for companies and why is it so complex?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's a lot at stake. We tend to think of B2C purchases, things we do in our personal life, as being more emotional. But when you're involved in buying something important for your company, your job and career are often on the line. I think we all get pretty emotional about that, right? It's really important. So first of all, I think we have to understand that, our buyers have a lot at stake when they're evaluating a vendor. Often they're putting their reputation and careers on the line in that purchase. It's a big deal. And then the other thing about them is that the buyer in B2B is nearly always a group of people. The average buying group in B2B is 10 people. So, getting 10 people to agree on anything, on lunch is hard. Just buying lunch as a group, is difficult. So to get them all to agree on something that's important to them personally, important to their company and all of that, that takes a lot of work. And then I think the third reason that it's complex is that B2B providers in whatever industry really make it harder. And I'll talk we here because I'm usually on this side of the equation. We make it harder because we try to differentiate ourselves from our competitors. That's great. But the way that marketers tend to help the company differentiate is by differentiating in the way that you talk about the solution rather than in how you highlight your differences. In other words, you use completely different language than your competitors to talk about the same thing. And so if you're evaluating 4 vendors, you've got 4 different organizations describing how they solve the same problem using completely different language, different frameworks, and all of that. And then you as a buying group have to make sense of all of that. And we got a lot of data that shows what the kind of pain that causes buying groups. So I think those are the main things. Plus, these days, there's just a ton of scrutiny on everything. There always has been scrutiny, but there's more and more all the time.
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting about, the concept of in an effort to differentiate, we're actually making it really hard on people to understand what it is that we're talking about rather than using really simple language that is universal and everyone can understand. And maybe there's other ways to differentiate besides like renaming something that's known or, it's almost like when there's nothing actually differentiated, we just change.
That's a problem, right? So in a lot of cases, maybe there isn't a lot of differentiation at the level of the product. And so, you kind of got to find some way to differentiate yourselves. But if it isn't on the product or the solution, you've got a competitive problem. But yeah, I think, for marketers, it's easier to differentiate based on how you talk about it. And, when we're all engaged in something, we're all engaged in really thinking about our product and how it offers value and how it differs. And when you're engaged in something, you come up with ideas about how to think about it and how to talk about it, and you become attached to those ideas. I know I do it all the time. The problem is that leaves you likely to start, making up language and making up words to talk about something that has a set of common terms and language already. And, it just makes it hard for buyers. Like
sure.
a really good piece of evidence for this, the average buying team in B2B in our research is evaluating 4 vendors. And to evaluate 4 vendors, that buying team, average size of 10, has 4,000 content interactions across their buying journey. Right. So one, that's an awful lot. That's too much. But if you just go from 4 vendors to evaluating 5, the number of interactions that they have in that journey, it doesn't go to 5,000. It doesn't go 4,000 for 4, 5,000 for 5. It goes to 8,000. It's like, that's how much harder and more complex it is if you add just one vendor to the average pile. That's kind of crazy. And so we got to do better.
Wow. Yeah, that is crazy. It's tough to navigate that, especially if, the buying group isn't, they're never going to be as expert in what you're selling as what you are. So
Right.
it's your job to kind of simplify for them and help them to understand it.
Yep.
The other thing I thought was really interesting that you said was about your job being on the line is a very emotional thing. And I've heard people say for years and years, everyone's said it, B2B and B2C aren't that different. You're still selling to people, still an emotional sale or whatever. But I do think that the big difference is you are spending someone else's money on the B2B side of thing. Even if you're a business owner, you're really, there's always kind of, it's the business's cash that you're putting on the line. So it does make for, maybe even a more emotional or a more risky decision. And you need a lot more information before you can make that decision. Whereas, I can decide to spend $10 on something I saw on Instagram and, it's just me, which is quite different, requires a lot fewer content interactions as you're describing.
It does, and then there's the social component of it too. So a lot of the things we might buy in our personal lives have social components. You might be buying them with your spouse or with or for your family or whatever. So, you've got a social component there. You're probably also thinking, if you're buying something, a car or house, you're thinking about how other people will look at it. So it's, you are thinking about those things, and we all do when we're buying stuff. But in the B2B context, you've got a bunch of other people who are participating in that decision with you. And there's a political social element to it too, which makes it more complex, which requires that you be able to make certain arguments about it. And then if you own the function that's going to use that thing that's being bought, you not only have a lot at stake and just, does the thing, is this the one that I want? But, once you get it, how's it going to impact your job and the job of the people who work for you or work with you, all of that stuff? I mean, it's a lot of responsibility. It really is. And, the evidence is that people take it very seriously. 4,000 content interactions across 11 months for a typical journey. Buyers take that stuff seriously. And even if they didn't want to, they have to, because their companies make them.
For sure. So in, trying to navigate this B2B sales process, what's helpful to understand in order to make sense of it? I mean, certainly the buying group is a big part of it, but let's dig in a little deeper there.
Yeah. So first most important thing, I think, we as a B2B revenue production industry are sort of, really now wrapping our heads around this. But your buyer is a big group of people. It is not one person. And so, the bigger your solution is, the more people are going to be involved. But the average across B2B is 10, and think of that for something that's maybe a 150 to 250,000 annual value solution. That's 10 people, goes down a little bit if it's smaller, goes up a little bit if it's larger. And so nobody's going to have customized, personalized tactics and content for all 10 people, plus all of the other people who might, be interested in that. But you have to understand, and this is actually the benefit of having these big buying groups, is that when there are 10 people involved and they're all doing some of their own research, and they leave a lot of tracks behind. Like, they leave a lot of signals, and that's awesome. I mean, that's really great. Like, it's really hard to find the tracks of what one person is interested in, but when there's 10 people, they just leave so much evidence about what that group is interested in. And then it really helps to be able to find them. So that, to me, is awesome. That's really great. But then the not so great is what we've done, and I think just the nature of human beings, but what we've done in marketing ever since there was email marketing back in the mid 90s is we've abused people's emails and our privilege of communicating with them. And I think we've caused buyers in B2B to be very defensive. And the evidence for that, it really comes in three pieces. The first piece of evidence is that buyers say that they do not talk to sellers until they're 70% of the way through the journey, or 2/3 of the way, whichever way is kind of easiest to remember it. But 2/3 of the journey is what buyers very, very consistently say. And when I say very consistently, I mean like nothing changes that. It doesn't matter who you ask. It doesn't matter where they are, what industry they're in. It doesn't matter how big the deal is. It doesn't even matter if it's an existing customer. They say that they have their first conversation with a seller about buying something 2/3 of the way through the journey, right? So they're not going to do that. Now, you may say, well, okay, let's just try to get them on the phone earlier, or get them, on email earlier. Well, buyers also say 83% of the time that they initiate first contact. So buyers are saying very clearly, when I do engage, it's going to be because I'm ready to do it. I caused that first interaction. And we looked at the 17% who said that their first interaction happened because a sales rep or somebody emailed or called. And that happens not earlier, but either at the same time or later. All right. So you emailing and calling, this is like the whole B2B revenue engine is built on, let's find leads, let's go call an email and make something happen. But what buyers say is that is not how it works. What buyers say is, I let you in and I talk to you when we're ready as a buying group to do that. That's at 70%. I control that very tightly. And then the reason that I'm ready to finally talk to you is that I have already, as a buying group, made a decision about who our favorite vendor is. And we've got a short list. And if I'm going to talk to you, you're on it. But otherwise, you're not going to get us. That's what the data said.
Yeah, which is wild. And I think really difficult for some marketing and sales teams to get their heads around, because there is still, I think we know this is happening. We know that there's so much information out there that people want to do their own research. They want to make their own decisions before they have a conversation. Yet we're still kind of doing this outbound motion in a lot of cases.
Yep.
And, really struggling to justify the poor results. But really it's sort of screaming in everyone's faces, like, this is not how people want to buy.
That's 100% right.
And how do we make adjustments for that? I mean, it's maybe a simple answer.
Yeah. Very good. So there's a couple pronged approach. The first one is, if your buyer in a typical B2B purchase process is going to be in market for 7 or 8 months before you talk to them. And so one of the most obvious things is you got to do everything you can to know which accounts are in a buying process but not ready to talk to you, and make sure that they get everything that could possibly help them to prefer you as a vendor. Right. So seeing the entire buying journey and not just waiting for them to show up on your website is probably the single most important thing you can do. Go, find evidence of that buying process. And that's, typically third-party intent data and anonymous traffic on your website will tell you which accounts are in market. And then you're not going to, what has to be different next is just sending your SDRs or your AEs out to try to get meetings with those folks is clearly not going to work. It's what they say. And everything that you see in lead conversion data across B2B from the beginning of lead production time tells you that that doesn't work, right? There's a less than 1%, conversion rate from lead to revenue across B2B. It's awful. It's the only thing that we've had really apart from cold calling. But, objectively, you look at that from the outside and you go, wow, that really doesn't work. And it really doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is that those people who come to your website, if you put up forms so that they have to fill out a form to get to your content, someone from that buying team will grudgingly do that. Clearly not the person who's ultimately the decision maker. They're, not the senior folks in that organization are almost never going to do it, but they're going to make somebody from their team come fill out the form to get your content. What you've done is you've made it a little bit difficult, and you've prevented the people who will not fill out the forms from seeing your content. So the data says 8 out of 10 people on a typical buying team will never fill out a form on your website. So, they may get that content passed to them from somebody else, but now you're relying on somebody else to do that and to get the right stuff and all of that, right? Even though the other people will be on your website anonymously. So most of the time when you get a lead, it's very likely that that person is part of a buying team, fairly low on the totem pole, who is charged with going out and collecting content for the buying group to look at. And if your content's ungated, then the whole buying team is going to come out and look at the stuff. But if it's gated, only the people who are charged with filling in the form are going to see it. It's probably pretty early in their buying journey when they first show up, probably within the first month or two out of 11-month buying journey. They're going to find your website and look at your content. They're going to become a lead. If you do lead scoring and you have MQLs, they're going to become an MQL for you at that point, right? Because they're looking at all your content. Your SDRs are going to get all hot and bothered, and they're going to chase after them and run 15 contact attempts against them and all of that stuff. And after the 15th contact attempt, when they haven't responded because they're still early in their journey and they're not going to talk to you yet, they're still 3 months, 4 months, 5 months away from wanting to talk to you, but they are evaluating you. And then probably what you're going to do is you're going to run your sequence, and the last of the sequence is going to be some sort of goofy breakup email where, you say, oh, you haven't responded, but, whatever. And it's going to be some weird thing. Meanwhile, your buying group is sitting back there kind of in the early stages of their process, still evaluating you. And they're at best rolling their eyes, at worst, depending upon how goofy your emails are. They're like, okay, not these guys, right? What you should be doing instead is looking at those guys and saying, okay, this is a team that appears to be in market. They're early in their process. Our job is to make sure they have everything they need to prefer us. Make ourselves available. Like if they do want to talk, of course, make yourself available. But any asset that you have that they should see, don't wait for them to come find it. And if you're an SDR sales rep, you can tell your boss that I said to do this. But if you've got good assets that are hidden behind gates and you know that an account is looking at you, get the asset and go send it to the people in that account so that they don't have to come fill out your form to get it. All right? Just make sure that everything that you have, if you have events, if you have subject matter experts they could talk to, if you have references that they could go see, if you have customer stories, get them in front of those people. And then understand that you're not going to get a meeting just because you ask for it. You'll get a meeting when they're ready. And your job is to make sure that when they're ready, they love you and want to talk to you first.
Yeah. I love that approach because it's, sort of giving without asking, which is very different from maybe what we've done for many, many years of, give me a meeting, give me your time. I'm going to help you. I promise. I got an email, maybe it was this morning, maybe it was a week ago. I can't keep track of time, but It was just, hey, I'd love to meet and talk about potential partnerships. I don't know who this person is. I don't know what we would partner on. So I don't have nearly enough information. I'm so top of funnel. I'm not in the buying process. Well, maybe I am for whatever he's selling. I don't actually know what it is because I haven't had any other information, just a request for a meeting. And everybody is in the world is going to say no to that all day long.
100%. Yeah.
So spending that time to just, I love the tip of like, take stuff that's behind a gate and just give it to them. Maybe even let them know you're giving it to them, even though it's behind a gate, and
100%. Yeah.
let them do their research.
Right. 100%. Yeah. Because people have been saying it for years. My old firm, Serious Decisions, used to be saying this a lot, even 5-6 years ago, but buyers are completely in control of their buying process now. When I first started in B2B, buyers had to talk to sales reps if they wanted to know about a solution. There was kind of no other way to get information. But we're so far past that. And so buyers, one, firmly believe, whether it's absolutely true or not, doesn't matter. They firmly believe they can pick a winner before they talk to a seller. Now, they still go through 70% of the buying process, they take completely on their own. They may talk to outside resources. They do talk to outside resources. They look at content, and they create a short list, and they put a vendor at the top of it. Their first call or email when they want to go through the real evaluation process now and do demos and that kind of stuff is with the ultimate winner 84% of the time. So what we know then is that they operate just like we do. If we individually, you're going out to buy a new car or something like that. You do a bunch of research, you evaluate stuff on your own with your family or whatever. And then if you're going to go out and do test drives or something, you don't start with your third choice. You don't go, okay, well, we don't really want the Camry, but let's go drive it anyway. You start with the one that you want. And you hope to probably not have to go anywhere else. Now in B2B, they have to go through the motions with all of the vendors, right? So there's 4 vendors on the list. They're going to have to get demos and all of that stuff from all 4 of them, but they've already decided which one they want to buy from. And now confirmation bias is very likely going to rule the rest of that process. We've already chosen this one. And by the way, if you can get 10 people to agree on something after 11 months or 8 months of looking at content, I think it's very unlikely that people are going to want to rock that boat. You know what I mean? You just think about the dynamics of a buying group, and probably everybody who's listening has been part of many buying processes. It's tough to get the group to agree, but if the group agrees, get people who throw a wrench into the works at the last minute. That's not really something people like very much, right? It's like, keep your wrench out of here. We kind of already agreed. Because it is such a hard process. So I think once you get to that point, their decision doesn't change. It just gets solidified. And if you're the 84% at that point where you got the first call, then you're very likely to win. It's your deal to lose. If you're not the 84%, you're sharing 16% with the other at least 3 vendors that they're looking at, and your chances are very poor.
Yeah, for sure. Now, how do you get yourself in a position where you're that top vendor? How do you, even when you do finally get on a call with sales, oftentimes if there are 10 people in that buying group, you're not talking to all of them. Yeah. They're still making decisions based on what you've provided them so far or the research they've already done, but you don't get a chance to really influence that decision. So how do you win the deal before you even talk to anyone, or with people that you never talk to at all?
Yeah, that's right. So one, you absolutely have to do it. So you've got to have a great digital presence. And that means not just having content, but content that actually answers the questions that your buyers have. I think what we talked about right at the top of the show, make your content not only answer the questions that they have at each point throughout their journey and for each of the key personas. Almost nobody's going to go more than 3 personas deep. It's pretty hard to do that across a whole buying journey, but for those major buyer personas, have the questions that they need to answer, make it super findable make it super easy to read. And then I think we need to bring things like buying guides and those kinds of things that kind of fell out of fashion back into play. Because we've got to make it easy for the buying groups that are looking at us to see how we differ, really based on points of value to them, so that they can make a decision more readily. And then, if you, I think, I work for 6 Sense. We live and breathe this all the time, and our solution actually helps companies see those organizations. So to me, the key is seeing the organizations that are out in market, and then focusing much more of your demand, budget, and effort on that set of companies. And it's a small set of companies that are actually going to be in market in the near future, that are in a buying process. And when you do that, when you're able to concentrate more of your spend on the part of the market that's actually in market, you can do a lot more things than if you have to spread that spend around across every account in your addressable market. And so, when accounts in market for us, they get really gold glove treatment. And that's even without talking to them, but they get invitations to every event. We do some really great events that allow us many times to start having relationships with people who are part of that buying group. Even though they don't want to have a sales conversation, very often they will engage with you in a way that does not involve a sales conversation. So, dinners where there's a bunch of their colleagues, community events, opportunities to speak with subject matter experts, those kinds of things that are necessarily kind of low scale and pretty high cost. You can do them when you're focusing them on the set of accounts that really are in market and not trying to do it for everybody. But I think the key, the key fundamental things everybody can do right now is make sure you have the right content for all of your buyers. It's in the right formats for them, and that you get it out in front of forums, get rid of your forums, get all of your content out in front of that. And if you want to get people's names and engage them, you've got to have compelling events and reasons for them to identify themselves and engage with you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you see any consistency in the types of personas that you recommend focusing on? Obviously, every business is different, every vendor is different, and what you're offering, sort of who the target audience is. But when it comes to a buying group, are there certain personas you should really be aware of that maybe aren't your primary target?
Yeah, I think especially when times are a little tighter, and as they have been for a lot of B2B lately, you've got to be able to address kind of questions that the financial ratifier as a kind of buyer persona would be, whoever that is in your organization. If it's actually a CFO, or if it's somebody on that group, or even if it's just somebody in the project management office, you've got to be able to address questions about how your solution provides value and then how it gets demonstrated. And so that may be simple or complex, but that person is very often in your buying process, and you've got to address that. One other thing that we saw, if you have a technology solution, when the IT folks get involved in purchases, they get stretched out, they get longer, the number of interactions that has to happen goes way up. And I think that's because for a lot of, especially in the SaaS world, we really don't do a good job of addressing the IT kinds of questions up front, and it's not in our content. So when an organization involves their IT team in that buying process, things slow down a lot. Now, there's probably some of that you can't do anything about. It's the nature of it, but you need to understand, look at your deals, deconstruct past deals, and understand, like if the finance person is there, all right, you've got to have questions that you answer up front. And if you do it early in the journey, you can save your time later on. Same thing with the IT guy. So I think those things are really important.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you talked about a buying guide. What do you envision when you think about like sort of a modern version of a buying guide for people?
Yeah, great question. So there's some things that most organizations are really afraid to do that I think we really need to start thinking seriously about doing. So like one of the big findings from our buyer study is that when you have a 4-vendor evaluation, which is the average length of that journey is 11 months. When you have a 5-vendor journey, the average length of that is 13.5 months. And if it's just 3 vendors that your buyer's typically evaluating, it goes down to 9. And it goes down even more if it's just 2 others, right? So that's a huge factor in how long your buying process is going to take, and how long the buying process is going to take is a huge factor in whether you're going to turn over revenue. Because, especially when things are a little bit dicey, adding 2.5 months to a buying process is going to end up killing, 10% of your deals or something like that. So a bunch of them are just not going to happen because something happens while it's in play. Right. So I think one of the things that we have to do differently in buyer guides now than we've ever done before is make it clear to your buyer which other small set of competitors they should be looking at and how you compare to them. Right. I think this gives a lot of people like sweaty palms when you think about it. You're not going to put anything in any serious buyer's mind. Like it's very, very rare that you're going to be in a situation as a vendor where you've got a buyer who's looking at you and they're going to go through their whole buying process without ever looking at another vendor. Like that doesn't happen, especially these days. They're going to look at others, and your best bet for keeping that process as short as it can be and as neat as it can be is to make it clear which other 2 vendors, maybe 3 at the most, they should be evaluating and how you compare. And then the other thing is, in that buyer's guide, use the language that your buyers see most often for how they, what their business problem is and what those solutions are. So what I mean by that is, if you have analysts or consultants or journalists, websites, whatever, that are really influential in your industry and help buyers decide what they're going to buy to solve your problem, find out what their language is. If they've got frameworks that they say that they use, align what you have to that. Don't do something new and different. Align whatever the most common way that your buyers see to think about that, solving that problem. Get it out in front in something that's very clear, and then compare yourselves with that small number of competitors. And what you want to do when you're saying that is, here's the 2 other folks you can look at, and you don't have to say this explicitly, but what you are saying tacitly is, and you don't have to worry about all the others, right? These are the 2, these are the 3, but not more than that. Those little competitors that are kind of on the outskirts of being relevant for your buyers are probably slowing down and killing a whole bunch of your ultimate sales processes, and you never even know that's happening.
Yeah. That's really interesting and terrifying to everyone who's listening.
Terrifying, yeah.
Right now is going, there's no way I'm going to tell them about the competitors. But to your point, if they're engaging with this content somewhere 3 months, 4 months, 5 months into their evaluation, they already know.
Yeah.
They already know who the competition is. They know who they're evaluating, and being able to exclude some maybe subliminally maybe does work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, 100%. It's got to be realistic about this. The average buying group is evaluating 4 vendors. So you good, you're one of them, but make sure it isn't 5. Like, do everything you can to influence it down from 4 even, because a couple of months on a buying journey, I mean, to me, that's huge. That's revenue this quarter instead of next quarter. It's revenue this year instead of next year. It's revenue that happens because they didn't have a bad quarter and end up killing it after 10 months or whatever. Revenue delayed is revenue lost.
Sure. Yeah. What do you think about transparency when it comes to pricing? It's kind of a big debate as well.
Yeah, it is a big debate. I mean, to the extent that you can. I certainly understand why in a lot of cases you're just setting yourself up for nightmare negotiations if you are too upfront about that, when there are just a lot of complicated processes that determine what the pricing is going to be. But if you're evasive about it, then I think that's the problem. So, if you can't give a ballpark for an organization where where an organization is looking at you and they can find themselves in some sort of matrix of, okay, we're like this big and we want to use these use cases or something like that. I mean, they ought to be able to find a reasonable round estimate of kind of what the cost might be. And here's another thing that I think it surprised me, even as an ex-analyst, and it surprises a bunch of people. I get a bunch of pushback on this one on LinkedIn, but 75% or so of buyers say that they engage with analysts and consultants during their buying process, and that's an important part of their buying process. The analysts and consultants know what you charge,
Sure.
right? And they know not from your briefings necessarily, but from talking to a lot of your customers. So for 8 years I was an analyst. I talked to, for the space I covered, I talked to several customers of your brand, whatever vendor you were in that space, every day. And so I know what you charge, and I know what your customer experience is, and I know all of that stuff. And I communicate. That's my job, is to communicate that to my clients. And so that's happening. It's like a reality check. You're not, if you're evasive about it, you're just making it a little more difficult for your buyer to understand what it's likely to cost them. You're not preventing it. You're just making it harder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, to your point earlier about, people are doing their research, they're going to reach out to you when they're ready. That's often a catalyst for that outreach, is like, well, now I need to know what it costs. And there's probably a lot of time wasted with people that it's just way out of their budget to begin with, or, someone, you might get excited to get that phone call, like for a conversation, but with literally zero information about what your, maybe ballpark price or a starting point. This is going to start at this amount. I guess you could get away with it maybe with some logos. There's a little bit of subliminal messaging there if you're working with very large companies. But I do find that having a little bit there does help to weed out maybe some time wasters. Not that it's their fault that they're wasting time. It's because they don't know that it's out of budget or anything like that.
Yeah. When I was very early in my career, when I was doing inside sales, I was very young, but I had this very experienced person who was sitting right beside me. And she used to, whenever she was talking to a prospect and they asked about price, she would give a ballpark. Like, we weren't supposed to, but she would do it. And then, every now and then the conversation would end with, well, you know what? Let's hang up now. Because it was like, we both know now this is not a fit. It was hilarious. She could get away with it. Probably most of us couldn't, but it was like, that's actually the right result for everybody, in some of those early conversations.
Yeah, for sure. Or even just, I've seen a lot of companies like redirect to a partner.
Right. Yeah, totally.
When I was working at a startup several years ago and evaluating a big piece of tech, and they just were immediately like, hey, we don't work with companies this small, but our partner does. You can buy it through our partner.
Let's hang up and you call them.
Exactly. Right. Even better if you can handle that all digitally, just like reroute people to the right places. But it's so important to understand the journey and your personas in order to direct people appropriately, really.
Right. Yep. Totally.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation. And I think that, the pieces about kind of understanding signals and intent, we didn't get too deep into that, but I know there's a lot of content from Sixth Sense about that. Where should people go to learn more about that part of the journey?
Two things. You can go to sixthsense.com/research, and we publish everything there. Surprisingly, no forms. So, it's all right there for you. And then follow me on LinkedIn. So it's pretty easy. There aren't too many Kerry Cunninghams. So Kerry Cunningham, Sixth Sense on LinkedIn, and I post on LinkedIn constantly. So lots of stuff there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really loved this conversation. And it was great to hear your expertise on the subject.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone to tuning in. I'll be back with another episode. I will chat with Brian Monsheen,